Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to CoachX Conversations, our regular conversation on LinkedIn Live with the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeff Hull. I'm the Director of Education at the Institute of Coaching, and I am really excited to be here today with Paul Zak, who is the recent best-selling author of a book called The Trust Factor, The Science of Creating High-Performance Organizations. I have had the opportunity to read and get to know Paul's work over the last few years, and I'm just thrilled that he was willing to take the time to chat with us today, because this subject of how to build trust, especially during this difficult time that we're all living through with the pandemic and the disruptions, is certainly key to success in organizations and something that all of us that work with leaders and organizational teams need to be thinking about. So welcome to Paul. Hi, Paul.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be with you again.
Great to have you here. I'm going to do a couple things. First, say hello to folks that are coming in from all over. We're excited to have you. I am saying hello from the afternoon here in very, very cold New York, but from wherever you are, please say hello and join us in the conversation. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. But I'm going to try to do two things with this interview because I've been thinking about what would be most interesting. I'm being sort of selfish, right? To learn a little bit about you, Paul, as a researcher and your background, but also I think a lot of us are confused and not always up to date on what is the real science behind trust. So that's actually really where I would love to start, is maybe you could just dive in for us and say, hello from Switzerland. They're coming in now. I'm just letting you know. Hello from Chile, Seattle, Stockholm, Norway. Wow. Okay. Wow. Welcome, everyone. So folks from all around the world joining us. So here's where I'd love to start, Paul. What is oxytocin? And why do we care?
And why do we care?
Yeah.
So let's go one step further back, which is why do we care about the neurobiology of trust?
Right.
We know trust is essential for effective family relationships, romantic relationships, effective teamwork. I mean, it's the lubricant that helps social endeavors work effectively. So, looking at the neurobiology of that really gives us precise ways to influence trust and to also understand what inhibits trust. And so that's why I really spent 20 years of my life trying to really understand the underlying neurobiology of this. And as you foreshadowed, we basically pulled, insights from the animal literature showing that when animals interact with safe conspecifics, generally rodents, they release this neurochemical in the brain, oxytocin, that does a number of interesting things, but essentially downregulates the stress of being around others, right? So even people that you know well, they can have bad days. I don't know. Maybe you'll stab me tomorrow, Jeff. Who knows? Right. So how do we're constantly modulating, appropriate, fear or vigilance with, hey, I want to interact. I want to get to know you. You're an awesome guy. We can do a project together or whatever. And so oxytocin seems to be that key signaling molecule. So we developed in the early 2000s a protocol to measure the acute brain's production of oxytocin in humans. So this is an interesting neurochemical in which, like many neurochemicals in the body, works as a hormone in the peripheral nervous system associated with birth and breastfeeding in women, but in the brain has this important signaling capability that says, hey, Jeff is safe. You can engage with him. You can interact with him. And here's the cool thing for teamwork. There's a couple interesting things we've shown in humans. One is it increases our sense of empathy. So now, not only do I have a cognitive sense of why you are focusing on this project, I get a sense of why you care about it. I'm actually more effective as a team member because I'm getting that emotional information. And then second, we've shown repeatedly in many experiments that it motivates me to work for team goals. So this is the recipe for effective teamwork, right? That I understand you better, even emotionally, and it has a motivation for me to work as a group. So group work is not unusual for humans. Our brains really evolved to do it. We don't have to coerce people to do it, but we do have to create environments in which we're able to facilitate the reciprocal release of oxytocin among team members.
So it's so interesting because, I mean, what you're really getting at is at the core of what makes us connected, right? And I'm curious when you say, I know this is all not easy to put into layman's terms, but I think it really helps us as leaders, as coaches, to understand the process. So could you say a little bit more about actually how you study it and what it means when you say releases oxytocin? And is it just in the brain, or is it literally throughout the entire body, through the bloodstream? How does it actually work?
Great question. So let's take the first one first. So, what does release mean? And so we've shown that essentially any positive social interaction will cause the brain to release oxytocin. So from a kind of coaching training perspective, just having a warm greeting, a hug, on the video conference we're doing now.
We can't do those anymore.
But you can do it orally, right? You can do this emotional check-in. Hey, Jeff, how are you? Right? You look happy, sad, joyful, worried. I can have that conversation. I can open up that door. And we've actually shown that when you're vulnerable, particularly as a leader, when you're vulnerable, that induces oxytocin release in the people you're talking to. So I think vulnerability is a real superpower for leaders. So oxytocin is made in the brain, has a very short half-life. So it's a quick on-off signal that says oxytocin is, this person's safe, or this environment's safe for me. Is released in the brain, activates a much larger network that I've called the human oxytocin-mediated empathy network. So it does a whole bunch of other things in the brain, but it's also released in the bloodstream. And so the protocol we developed originally required serial blood draws to look at the change in oxytocin in blood. And subsequently, because there are receptors in the cranial nerves, we developed technologies that let us measure this in real time, non-invasively. So there are technologies now to measure this effect. But essentially, it's kind of priming. So I think the coolest thing for listeners is that the more you release oxytocin, the more you connect to people, you establish default pathways in the brain, so it becomes easier to connect.
So in other words, if you start creating environments where you are releasing oxytocin within yourself or within others, it can become more habituated, like it can be increased naturally? Is that what you're pointing to?
Exactly right. So again, it's a gift you have to give to somebody else. You have to reach out to get their brain to release oxytocin, and generally they're going to reciprocate. And so think of that as a gift. I want to give the gift of oxytocin release, which reduces physiologic stress. By the way, improves the immune system, right? In these crazy pandemic times, we always like to have a better immune system. So it just says, oh, this is a safe environment, I can relax. And we've shown in studies in for-profit businesses that individuals who work in higher trust organizations who release oxytocin are more innovative. They enjoy their jobs more. They get along with colleagues better, greater job satisfaction. They get sick less. I mean, we can just go down the list. And so again, it's incumbent on leaders to think about how to create an environment in which I have this opportunity to have positive interactions with my colleagues. And by the way, important thing here, this doesn't mean that I should have Taco Tuesday, every week. And it's not about making people happy. In fact, moderate stress is important for oxytocin release. Stress is not bad, right? So challenge stress, sometimes called eustress. I want that team focus. So the brain is a very lazy organ because it takes so much energy to run it. So if there's not a reason for me to engage with these people at work, we're just like, nothing going on today, do some emails. But if we have a project due in a week and I got to marshal all these social resources, then I have a focus. And so for inverted U curve, we see everywhere in biology. So again, if I go too far in the U curve, if I've got so much chronic stress that you're not sleeping, you're cranky, not good. That's going to inhibit oxytocin release. So high stress is an inhibitor, but moderate stress is a promoter of oxytocin release. So again, you can see from a leadership perspective, I want to set challenge goals. I want to have lots of feedback. I want to encourage people to take risks, right? Trust is about trying new things. And all those things feed into also a sense of high locus of control for employees. So now I feel like, I work in an environment where, it's almost like the old Facebook saying, move fast and break things. Like we can do that. We can try a bunch of stuff. We'll know right away if it doesn't work. And I'm going to take ownership of that. If it works, attaboy, someone's going to recognize that. If it doesn't, like, okay, hey, this didn't work. Tell the community of people I work with, don't try this thing. I failed on that. We tried it for 2 days. It was a bad waste of time. So in the low trust environments, you don't see that innovation because people are essentially punished if they make mistakes. And punishment is processed in the brain just like physical pain is. It activates the pain matrix. So what happens when your boss yells at you? So I've had yeller bosses. I just can't stand it. So yell at you, and your brain says, this is a painful stimulus. You're being ostracized from your social group. Don't do that thing again. It's like touching the hot pot. Don't do that again. That didn't work. That's a bad idea. So are you going to take more chances? Are you going to innovate? Hell no.
Right. Yeah, it's suppressed, not only emotionally, but in the brain, right?
Yeah.
I love this. This is so helpful. I just want to take a minute to say hello from the folks that are coming in and hopefully raise some oxytocin around the world, because we have folks saying hi from London, from Greece, from Montreal, from Portugal, from Minnesota. Cold there. We need lots of oxytocin from
Right.
Ireland, from Kenya. So put in your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to some of those today. I'm loving this, Paul, because I think that those of us that are not scientists, we read some of this kind of literature, we read research. I know I did when I was preparing for writing my book, and it can be sometimes a little bit confusing. So I'm going to ask you two more scientific questions, and then we'll shift gears. All right. The first, they kind of go together, but the first one is, you mentioned that oxytocin has a short half-life. So I'm curious if it sort of dissipates or disappears or evaporates, or what happens post oxytocin. And then the second question is, how does it relate to serotonin? Because we also hear about this thing called the happiness hormone that I think most people think of as serotonin. So you're the scientist. Thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, both great questions, Jeff. Thank you. So I talked about this larger network that instantiates empathy. So oxytocin facilitates the release of midbrain dopamine. So dopamine is this reinforcement chemical. Dopamine. So essentially it says it feels good to do good. If I'm nice to people, I'm getting this positive feedback. Right? You smile, hold the door for you, you say thank you. That helps instantiate appropriate social behaviors. And the second is oxytocin facilitates the release of serotonin in the brain. So I get this. So serotonin is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It kind of calms things down, gives you a little bit of a mood lift. So this dopamine serotonin is essentially a system that says, this is what the humans are valuing. Again, if you're in that safe environment, if I'm in a conflictual environment, I'm fighting a different set of factors. And so it really is a reinforcement mechanism. And so, as you said, because of the short half-life for oxytocin, I don't want to leave that collaborate, you're totally safe doorway all the way open, right? I want to open it up, interact, and then if I get something that's a negative stimulus, I'm going to have a kind of a fear or aggressive response. And so again, the brain's trying to adapt second by second. So I think from a team perspective, it is really focusing on that connection, making sure that people feel safe, feel cared for, and really the whole person here, not just, I hate the term human capital. I don't know who coined that. Someone will tell us in the chat. You're not a machine. You're a human being. So it's really about connecting to humans.
Right.
And it seems so stupidly obvious that if I connect to the people I work with, I really care about them, put them first, they're going to put me first. And now we're in this really beautiful feedback loop in which it feels good to just work as a team, like a jazz quartet playing off each other.
Beautiful metaphor. So what can we do? I mean, I think everyone is sitting thinking, this all makes great sense. We understand a little bit more about how it all works biologically and in terms of our connectivity. How can we make this work in cyberspace for us? Are there tips that you have? Because we're all trying to do, Zoom calls, and it's not easy to do the whole person, as you said, when you can only just see the face.
Right. So part of it is to take what we naturally do when we go into a meeting in person and port that into the video conference space. So okay. What do we naturally do in the hallway? Hey, Jeff, how are you? Oh, how's your weekend? Oh, gosh, it's cold, man. How you like that little bit of chit chat? That is not wasted time. It's actually nice connecting time, right? It says, I recognize you as a human being, not as a worker. So I was on a Zoom yesterday and the guy was a little late. He was apologizing and he said, oh, I'm just going from Zoom to Zoom. I said, no problem. Let's just slow it down. So again, because of the role of stress, kind of arousal, you don't have time to connect. Right. So we see a lot of organizations, including some of the major tech companies that you would know, that do a 3-minute kind of eyes closed meditation prior to a meeting. Let's just get centered. Let's get calm. So the kind of term of art from Google is psychological safety. Let's establish the psychological safety. Let's relax. And now we can get into it. And then maybe building in a couple minutes for, hey, any personal news. Personal news at work? Yeah, you're a person, right? So how's your kid? How's your dog? Oh, you're in Texas. Oh my gosh, is the power out? Are you guys okay? So all that kind of personal check-in works really well. It's not a waste of time. It's actually a very valuable investment in the relationships you have.
Actually, I think it's such a crucial point because in so many leadership team environments that I work in, they have a tendency now in the cyberspace to sort of dispense with that and sort of get back to work and or stick with the work. And what you're pointing to is we can use this as coaches to remind our clients that this is really valid, evidence-based science about how people connect. It's not just a nice to have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a precursor to everything else that you want to do, right? So establish that relationship. Again, we know money is a very weak motivator. So what you're trying to do essentially is motivate people to engage in discretionary effort, put in discretionary effort, more effort than they're required to. Why would I do that? You know, because my team relies on me, because they see me as a full human being. They see me as valuable in a larger sense, and therefore I want to fulfill those expectations. So also one way to think about the brain, Jeff, is, you know, it's very much like a muscle, right? Once it's stressed, it needs a little recovery period. So again, from a sort of leadership perspective, I want to give you challenge goals. I want to have these hit the milestones. I want to coach you to hit these goals. But then I want to step back and go, okay, you guys did a fabulous job. You hit that goal for the client. Now, give you a couple of days where you can just get caught on an email, go to home on time, or, you know, stop work at time from home, and, you know, do those things. So have a little refractory period. Let everyone get caught up on sleep. So I love the sprint. I love, you know, focusing on a goal. I think it's very important to do that. But recognize that if you finish a 3-month project on Tuesday, if I give you a giant 3-month project on Wednesday, now building chronic stress, I put you past that kind of inverted U curve. Yep. So that's okay, right? And, you know, because the brain's so adaptive, you know, don't expect perfection, right? People are going to have bad days, and they're going to struggle, sometimes for reasons nothing to do with work. So, you know, build that kind of in. That's okay. That's what humans do, right? We're not machines. We're not robots. Not yet, at least. We're not cyborgs. And so having sort of tolerance or even acceptance for that variation is fine. That's okay. I mean, I don't want people to, you know, slag off and not do anything ever, but, you know, it's important to give people some space because they may need recovery for reasons that you don't know about.
Yeah, it's part of building restoration and resilience in all of us, which we have, you know, struggled with, I think, in the past few months. In our last few minutes, I want to do a little bit of modeling of what you just talked about, which is to do the real human connection. You need to know the person. You need to take the time to learn a little bit about them and as a human being. So let me ask you, you know, how did you get into this field? What were some of the key steps that you took to become a neuroscientist and a neuromanagement expert?
I mean, the true story is I'm a Martian, Jeff, so I don't really understand the humans. And, you know,
welcome to our planet.
I found that humans are a fascinating species, so I've been trying to understand them. And really, I think developing tools, I'm really a tool guy. So how do we have tools to really understand, you know, this is not soft science, this is the hard science. Like humans are complicated, right. So social behaviors are complex. So how do we develop tools so that, you know, lots of people can understand these? So it really drives me to, what really drives me is trying to create a better life for individuals. Most of my professional work has focused on that. And to me, that's number one, measurement, and then creating tools in which people can, in fact, you know, manage these more difficult things. It's hard for me to say. It's like when you get a new boss, they say, we got some new policies. Are you on board? Oh, I'm on board. Sure. I don't even know what they are, but I'm on board, right? So I think if you can measure how effectively you're connecting to people, communicating, how effectively you're motivating them, then we're in a much different world, right? So we're in a world where we can measure and go, oh, look, the group on average is okay, but Ed Peters from the UK, I see you there. Hi, Ed. So Ed's struggling, right? And so if I had that level of data, then I can go, okay, let me spend a little extra time coaching with Ed because he needs a little more care, a little more help. So again, I'm trying to be more human over time. And I think, you know, we all study what we're weak in. So maybe I had some deficits in empathy. I've tried to do research and apply that to my own life.
Well, say more about that. How did you fall into this space of studying the neuroscience of connection and empathy?
Part of it was work we had done in the late 90s showing that trust was among the strongest predictors to show which countries would grow, which would grow their living standards. And, the World Bank used this, and it's very exciting. And they said, well, why do two people ever trust each other? And I said, well, I can tell you about environments. I can tell you why trust is high in Sweden and low in Colombia. And then I thought, man, I'm so full of crap. So if you're a researcher, you're constantly, it's like imposter syndrome. You go, I'm full of crap, man. I don't know anything about this. So we really spent more than 20 years now studying trust and developing these tools. And just to say, lots and lots of collaborators around the world. And we've done a lot of work on sexual abuse and on criminal psychopaths and a lot of work in psychiatry now. So once you have tools, you can actually apply them to really solve problems that real humans face. So I'm super interested in problems that people face and seeing if we can find tools to resolve them. So we have a lot of clinical trials going in stuff kind of around the oxytocin or impaired social behavior space. And that's exciting. It's wonderful to work with patients and try to improve their lives.
That's great. I mean, you're kind of, to my mind, you're getting at the core of what matters at this point in time in our evolution. As you said, I'm from Mars, and and sometimes I think we feel like we're all from Mars. And what you're doing is you're trying to build the strands of connection that make us feel like we're not from Mars, that we are actually belonging and together and connected. I'd love for you in our last few minutes to share any tips that you have learned that you think folks would value. So many of us are out here trying to build teams, trying to coach folks, trying to build resilience and find that sweet spot between too much stress and not enough stress. Trying to learn to listen more effectively in a very highly polarized environment, at least here in the United States, and I think in some other parts of the world. So, it's not often that we get to have tips from someone who's really studied this field. So what would you suggest? What are some of your big takeaways?
Yeah, I think it's really, as I said earlier, giving the gift of connection to other people. But it means really being present, right? So, getting rid of all these devices that take our attention away. Give someone the gift of being fully present. As you said, listening, Jeff, is very important. Making that time for that connection, and then following up on that. So I think the best way you can build a high trust organization as a leader is to be trustworthy yourself. And so to be trustworthy means to follow through on what you say, but also be clear on the why part. So I think often we're so busy that we focus a lot on the what, here's what we're going to do, but not the why. So if I can share that, this is why we're doing this, and really be a better listener. Have a town hall before a big policy change. Listen, and then go back and say, okay, I listened to people. I talked to all my advisors. Here's what our plan is, and here's why we decided to do this. It recognizes people as having brains, having an interest in what's going on. So in the best organizations, from a cultural perspective, we find not only high job satisfaction, but low employee turnover, and people start to identify as their job. So I did a lot of work with Zappos, online retailer, and Tony Hsieh was just passed away. He was a dear friend, and
he wrote The Happiness Factor, I think, or something. There was a book.
That's right. So Delivering Happiness.
Delivering Happiness.
Very much
right.
worth reading. And so we actually took blood to measure brain activity and productivity in Zappos employees. This is my last book, Trust Factor, that you nicely mentioned. And I noticed on the weekend, they were coming into a space we had rented, and these people who are off of work would wear Zappos sweatshirts and t-shirts. I finally started asking them, hey, what's the deal with this? They said, I identify as a Zapponian. That's part of my personality. Imagine that at your workplace. If I say, oh, I see myself, I have Institute of Coaching on my shirt on the weekend because I see myself as that's part of my personality, and I'm proud. Just think how much effort these people put in during the work week.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And in our world today, work and life are kind of bleeding into each other, right? So if we can build that oxytocin in our systems, release it, and have that connective tissue with our coworkers, maybe we'll have more of it with our friends and with our families too, because the lines demarcating them are obviously more permeable today. I'm gonna drop one more quick science question into you because we just have a couple minutes. But I love this question because I'm curious. Dr. Kayanush has a colleague of mine, a dear friend. She's asking, can you prescribe oxytocin?
So we have done many studies. We developed a protocol to take synthetic oxytocin, shoot it safely into the human brain through the nose.
Shoot it into the brain.
Yeah. So I've done about 700 times and no adverse effects. So we use that to show that this, is causally related to trust and other pro-social behaviors. But that's really a sledgehammer. So the brain's own oxytocin system is very surgical. It's very focused. It's a quick on-off. It's much more balanced. So even in those psychiatric disorders like autism that have impaired social behaviors, just sledgehammering your brain with oxytocin doesn't really have a lot of effect because the larger brain networks are dysregulated. So I would say hugs, not drugs.
Well said. Or even do cyber hugs work? They do, right?
Absolutely. And it's really, connecting to people, showing them love in the philia sense, right? So really caring about those people around you. It's hard not to care for someone who cares for you. So again, you as a leader can start this, right? Form that connection, and then you'll see generally this positive feedback loop.
That's great. So you're not necessarily recommending that we all go out and get a prescription for oxytocin.
I'm not. So here's my last suggestion, if I may. So
Sure.
I try to end every conversation with the word service. So I'll do that now with you, Jeff.
Beautiful.
Jeff, I want to be of service to you. And I have so much enjoyed spending time with you, getting to know Institute of Coaching. And so if I can help you, if I can help the people who are on today, you can Google me, find me. I'm happy to connect and try to help others. So, if you think about giving to others and they'll give back, then just be of service.
I love that. And you are absolutely being of service to us at the Institute of Coaching. And we're really honored. I'm feeling privileged to have the opportunity to have 2 conversations with you in 1 month. And I highly recommend your wonderful book, The Trust Factor. I did a lot of research and reading of many of your papers. As I told you before, much of it got cut by my editor from my book, but I still learned so much. So thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, at the end of the day, some of this, I think, is what we all sort of know intuitively, right? Around how we just want to feel connected and feel loved and bonded with others. Mm-hmm. But the science is really valuable because it really reinforces the message in a way that, everyone can benefit from it. So thank you so much for taking the time, Paul. And thank you all for joining us from all over the world. I hope we've found this conversation valuable.